I feel like since the release of the Michael Jackson biopic, there has been a newfound sort of global resurgence of interest around the King of Pop. I mean, if you go online right now, you'll see people missing him, people mourning him, but you can't really have a global conversation about Michael Jackson without the topic of his allegations coming up. Now, I'm not here to debate whether Michael Jackson is innocent or not, because between documentaries and video essays and news reports, there is 3 decades worth of information about that topic. What I'm here to debate is the claim that Gen Z would treat Michael Jackson better. You can't escape this statement. This is something that you will see again and again and again in any kind of Michael Jackson related video. They argue that amidst the allegations, if they were to happen today, Gen Z would treat Michael Jackson with grace and dignity the way that he wasn't treated in the 1990s and 2000s. They argue that they wouldn't allow tabloids to exploit him, they would have been more understanding about his skin condition vitiligo, and they would have been more compassionate about his relationship with children considering the unconventional way he grew up. I even made a short form video of this which garnered very mixed reactions, so I figured that this is a topic worth discussing. Before we get started, just a quick trigger warning for discussions of abuse, allegations, legal trials, mental health issues, media exploitation, and death. If any of these topics are distressing for you, just feel free to skip ahead or watch another video. If you're new here and you're wondering who this sexy Turkish boy on your screen is, my name is Adlama. I discuss all things 2000s and or niche. Now this video kind of has 2 parts. First, we're going to go through a timeline of Michael Jackson's life in the 2000s to see how event after event shaped him from becoming one of the biggest celebrities in the world to one of the most ridiculed people on the internet. And we're going to take a look at his death and how that transformed his public image and the way that people perceive him today. For the end of the video, we're going to put Gen Z on trial and see if we would really treat Michael Jackson better than the generations that came before us. Without further ado, let's take a look back at the King of Pop's final decade on Earth. Before the new millennium, Michael's life was already becoming increasingly unstable. The aftermath of the first set of allegations against him in 1993 still lingered and did a lot of damage to his reputation. It seemed that the media's portrayal of Wacko Jacko was starting to catch on with the general public. This version of Michael was eccentric, unstable, and public fascination with his controversy started to overshadow his music. Unfortunately, the early 2000s weren't any easier for him. The decade kicked off with a legal finalization of his divorce from Debbie Rowe in April of 2000 and a wave of legal trouble regarding the cancellation of his Millennium concerts. Now, 2001 was supposed to be a very big year for Michael, considering this was his first studio album that he would release in 6 years. Invincible was meant to be a comeback. It was supposed to show the world why Michael Jackson was still the king of pop. Not to mention, production of this album cost $30 million, which is insane. Initially, things were going pretty well with the release of You Rock My World as the lead single in August of 2001, and Michael performing 2 huge concerts at Madison Square Garden in September of 2001. And now you might be thinking, wasn't there another really major event during September of 2001? And you'd be right. You see, these concerts took place on September 7th and September 10th, respectively. Yeah. So, although the September 11th attacks weren't the only reason why Michael Jackson's comeback album failed at the time, it did understandably take away a lot of attention from the album's promotion, or what was supposed to be promotion. Invincible's success was also deeply hindered by various internal issues and a very messy and public falling out between Michael and his record label, Sony Music. This sets the stage for 2002, when Michael, after frustration had been building during and after the release of Invincible, publicly called out Sony and its then head, Tommy Mottola, during a series of protests during the summer of 2002. He claimed that Sony had suddenly stopped promoting Invincible in an attempt to sabotage it. He also dubbed Mottola a racist who took advantage of black artists and called him very devilish. But Sony wouldn't take this lying down. They would shoot back, saying the bizarre false statements Mr. Jackson made on Saturday make it clear that his difficulties lie elsewhere than with the marketing and promotion of Invincible. I find that statement very crazy because they're blatantly just implying that Michael is losing touch. Later in August, during the 2002 MTV VMAs, Britney Spears introduced Michael Jackson on stage and referred to him as the Artist of the Millennium. Now, it seemed that Michael Jackson genuinely believed that he was receiving an Artist of the Millennium award, so he proceeded to go on stage and give a 3-minute acceptance speech.
When I was a little boy in Indiana, if someone had told me that one day I would be getting, as a musician, the Artist of the Millennium Award, I wouldn't have believed it.
Now this VMAs moment seemed to reinforce the image that Michael Jackson was really disconnected and he was kind of socially out of sync. Now to this day, some fans still argue that this was a deliberate prank by MTV and the intention was to humiliate Michael on his 45th birthday and increase their ratings. They also claim that he was seen crying in a car after the awards show, but I couldn't find anything in my research to actually back this up. Now things would only go from bad to worse when in November of 2002, Michael briefly held his son Blanket over a hotel balcony in Berlin to present him to fans that gathered below, creating the infamous baby dangling incident. Now this was a very, very big pop culture moment. I mean, the backlash that he got for this was immediate and it was global. He was quick to admit in a written statement the next day that he made a terrible mistake and he would never intentionally endanger the lives of his children. It went as far as the Berlin police even considering opening an investigation for child endangerment, but they ultimately decided not to. Long term, this not only damaged his public image, but it also increased concern for his mental well-being, considering that his children's safety could have been at risk. So far, Michael has spent the majority of the early 2000s in a lot of controversy, but things really came crashing down in 2003. Now it all started in February of 2003 when British journalist Martin Bashir, after spending 8 months filming Michael, released a documentary called Living with Michael Jackson. This supposed unfiltered documentary was supposed to repair Michael's highly tarnished reputation and provide an honest, sympathetic portrayal into his life. But after the final cut aired, it became really obvious to Michael that Martin Bashir had different intentions than he initially believed. What was supposed to be an intimate film designed to garner public sympathy was actually a sensational expose edited to portray Michael as an odd, eccentric individual who was completely out of touch. In this documentary, he famously admits to sleeping in the same bed as children, and he even held hands with 13-year-old Gavin Arvizo on camera. This documentary was also filmed at the same time that the baby dangling incident occurred. So while Michael was under public scrutiny, he tried to address people's concerns on camera but seemed to shake uncontrollably whilst feeding his newborn baby. The documentary only reopened broader public suspicion around Michael. Michael accused Bashir of betrayal and manipulation. He spent February and March fighting back.
Today I feel more betrayed than perhaps ever before, that someone who had got to know my children, my staff and me, whom I let into my heart and told the truth, could then sacrifice the trust I placed in him and produce this terrible and unfair program.
He even released a rebuttal special titled The Footage You Weren't Meant to See, which showed Bashir praising Michael off camera and footage that Michael claimed contradicted the documentary's narrative. But further damage to his public image was already done, so Michael once again became reclusive. Until November, when Gavin Arvizo accused Michael of molestation, and authorities launched a major investigation leading to the raid of Neverland on November 18, 2003. Helicopters, police vehicles and reporters were surrounding Neverland Ranch, and as most things with Michael Jackson do, it became a very big scandal. But a scandal quickly escalated when authorities announced multiple criminal charges against the King of Pop, and on November 20th, 2003, Michael surrendered to authorities at the Santa Barbara airport, which led to his infamous mugshot being taken. And now there are claims that this mugshot was photoshopped or edited, but upon doing my own research, I found that the alleged real mugshot was actually a picture of Michael with James Brown at the 2003 BET Awards in June that was photoshopped onto the original mugshot. The next 2 years for Michael would be dominated by criminal prosecution and public humiliation. At this point, his music career disappeared from public conversation completely, and this point of his life was all about survival. Michael entered 2004 preparing for one of the biggest celebrity trials in modern history. On January 16th, he pleaded not guilty, and the event drew a massive global gathering of fans outside the Santa Maria courthouse, where Michael famously climbed on the top of his SUV to greet them. 2005 was officially the year of the trial, and it all kicked off immediately in January. But you have to remember, this wasn't just any trial, this was one of the biggest public media scandals of the 2000s. And at this time, public opinion about Michael Jackson was completely polarized. Die-hard fans were a constant presence outside of the courthouse, holding signs of encouragement, wearing his merch, singing his music, and even a few impersonators showed up. But it seemed that people who weren't a die-hard fan, or just the general public, seemed to think that Michael was an undeniable, guilty pedophile who slept in bed with children and deserved to be behind bars. Prosecutors were arguing that Michael had manipulated vulnerable families, inappropriate behavior occurred, and Neverland functioned as a grooming environment. He faced 10 felony counts, including lewd acts upon a minor child, attempting to commit a lewd act, administering an intoxicating agent to a minor, and conspiracy to hold the victim and his family captive. The trial lasted 4 months and featured highly graphic testimony regarding his sleeping arrangements, pornography, and alcohol, but also focused on Michael's argument that the accuser's family fabricated claims for financial gain. Now, I could continue and go into depth with the trial, but that has been done a million times over on YouTube, so we're gonna cut things short. On June 13, 2005, Michael was found not guilty on all counts. Fans celebrated worldwide. Michael could finally rest knowing that he won legally. And with that, the trial officially came to an end. And now the next few years were essentially just periods of isolation for Michael Jackson. They were defined by the fallout of his trial and the financial struggles that he was going through. I tried to do some research, but it seemed that Michael Jackson was basically out of the public eye completely during the late 2000s. He spent many of it just abroad. Sightings of him were rare, only making a surprise appearance at the 2006 World Music Awards in London, which was criticized due to heavy promotion that Michael would perform Thriller live. But after receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award, he walked off stage without performing what was advertised, which caused frustration among attendees and media outlets. Although it proved that there was still a hunger for Michael Jackson and there was still a place in the music industry for the King of Pop. But it would take Michael a few years before he wanted to reclaim his throne. In 2007, according to former associates and bodyguards, Janet Jackson allegedly recruited her brothers to help stage an intervention for Michael due to his increasing reliance on prescription medication.
We weren't very successful.
How did he react to the interventions that you all conducted?
How do I say this? When it's something like that, people can tend to be in denial.
Was Michael in denial?
I felt that he was in denial.
Michael told his bodyguards to prevent his family from entering his property. He even refused to accept calls from his mother, Catherine. 2008 would see the successful release of the 25th anniversary version of Thriller, which featured a lot of contemporary artists. And for a moment, this brought renewed nostalgia and positive media attention to Michael. It also showed that his name still had enormous power in the music industry, but he was still having really bad financial struggles. He was facing foreclosure threats, debt tied to Neverland, and pressure involving his music catalogue. And by the start of 2009, Michael was mostly living privately in Los Angeles. And behind the scenes, there were discussions and negotiations about a comeback from Michael Jackson, which all led to March 5th, 2009, when Michael announced the This Is It tour in London. This was huge. I mean, it was the comeback of a legend. It was supposed to be a final curtain call before he retired. This was essentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Intensive rehearsals began in April through the spring, and in May, O2 actually expanded the concerts due to demand. But at this point, Michael Jackson was 50 years old, so there was a lot of concern about how his body physically was going to be able to handle and withstand all this pressure. I mean, especially Michael Jackson being the perfectionist that he is, this was going to be an enormous workload. But regardless, fans were very excited to see him in July. Tickets were selling rapidly, and for a moment it seemed like Michael Jackson was ready to grace the global stage again. But that was until the 25th of June 2009, when it was announced that Michael Jackson had unfortunately and suddenly passed away. So now that we've had a little Michael Jackson history lesson, let's take a look back and see what public perception of him was like before and after his death during this time. Now, today's Michael Jackson and 2000's Michael Jackson are two very different people. For celebrities, sometimes death can be the biggest rebrand. It forces people to look at them retrospectively, rather than reducing their entire life to a single mistake or a negative headline. Today we can look at Michael Jackson's entire legacy and praise him as being a musical genius. If you go online right now, you will see people fawning about how hot and attractive Michael was during his Bad era or his Thriller era, or how cute he was during his Jackson 5 days, but you don't typically see the average person talking about 2000's Michael Jackson. It seems that the general public seems to leave out this era of Michael Jackson from the conversation, and it's kind of tucked away. It's kind of like a taboo. So I want you to do something for me. I want you to look at this photo of Michael. Really take it in. This is who Michael Jackson was in the 2000s. When you said the name Michael Jackson to the average person back then, this is who they thought of. Not Thriller Michael, not Bad Michael, this Michael. In my opinion, this picture is the epitome of the character Wacko Jacko, which was a version of Michael Jackson that the media had portrayed to the general public. This was a man who supposedly bleached his skin and got surgery because he wanted to be white. A washed up legend who was accused of molesting children. All the rumors, the allegations, every bad thing that's said about Michael Jackson is usually encapsulated in this era, which is why people tend to not talk about it. Now, believe it or not, a lot of articles written about Michael Jackson during the 2000s are still online and archived today. They serve as a relic of a time before Michael Jackson was this untouchable deceased legend, but instead a living public figure who was subject to criticism like any other celebrity. Because let's face it, criticizing a dead person isn't going to make you look good, and that's bad for business. But he wasn't above criticism in 2002, when Michael's Sony protests were met with criticism by journalists. For example, a Los Angeles Times article released in July of 2002 called his actions selfishly motivated and disingenuous. And overall, they were just trying to push the image that Michael Jackson was greedy or paranoid. Another article from the New York Post in 2003 following the release of Living with Michael Jackson is titled "Jacko Documentary Proves He's ... not suitable for children." In this article, they refer to him as Wacko. They state Jackson comes across as a pathological liar, proceeds to mock his appearance, and calls to have him and his wife in jail. I mean, there are like hundreds of articles like this criticizing Michael Jackson, taunting him, mocking him, public and available for everyone to see how Michael Jackson was actually treated while he was alive. You see, in the early 2000s, he was just mostly portrayed as weird and bizarre, but the mid-2000s is when his public image really took a hit. For example, during his trial, Michael's erratic courtroom arrivals and eccentric behavior attracted a lot of scrutiny from the press. At worst, he was almost penalized and faced risk of arrest for arriving to court late. And one of the most infamous moments happened in March of 2005, when he arrived late to court wearing pajamas after reportedly being hospitalized. Incidents like these slowly happening back to back during the 2000s sort of created the image and pushed and reinforced the image that Michael Jackson just wasn't all there mentally anymore. And it gave the media plenty of ammo to push this narrative towards the general public. But all of the jokes and the criticism weren't just limited to tabloids, it was also very much present in pop culture at the time, which I think very heavily influenced Gen Z's perception of Michael Jackson. Jokes about the king of pop were regular material for late night TV such as Jimmy Kimmel, Jay Leno, and SNL.
We now return to Neverland Ranch.
Oh, Michael, I'm so worried. It's just the flu, Liz Taylor. Michael, I'm not talking about the flu. I'm talking about the trial. Don't worry about the trial. I'll just say that I like boys to sleep in my bed. And then we'll all go home and have a slumber party.
Not to mention shows such as South Park and Family Guy also routinely had Michael Jackson bits.
Hi, everyone. Yes, okay, that's more than enough, Michael. Yes, very good. Little dangerous, I think. That's enough. That's enough. I said that's enough, you sick, twisted fruit!
Another culprit that really normalized jokes about Michael Jackson within the youth was the parody genre of film, most notably the Scary Movie franchise.
What did you do with Sue?
I didn't touch her, I swear.
I don't believe you.
Please, for God's sakes. She's a girl.
You sick.
But arguably the biggest pop culture moment making fun of Michael Jackson was from a music video released by one rapper that everyone loves to hate. Eminem's Just Lose It music video was almost an attack on Michael. It mocked the allegations, his relationship with children, the 1984 Pepsi incident where his hair caught on fire, and plastic surgery rumors. Michael publicly condemned the music video multiple times, outraged and hurt, not only as a person, but also a fellow entertainer in the music industry.
I've never met Mr. Eminem, and I've always admired him, and to have him do something like that was pretty painful as an artist to another artist.
However, instead of retaliating publicly like most singers would do, Michael Jackson did something very different. He actually had the video pulled from some networks, and his business partnership acquired the publishing rights to some of Eminem's back catalogue, meaning Michael Jackson would earn royalties from Eminem's song whenever they were used or performed publicly. And I'm not gonna lie, that's a very admirable level of pettiness that I really hope I can achieve in the future. All this being said, the constant scrutiny and mockery and the way that Michael Jackson was portrayed in the media and pop culture really shaped a young Gen Z's impression of him. He was a constant punchline and a walking joke, so many teenagers and young people wouldn't really take Michael seriously as an artist. And I think Gareth Grundy, deputy editor of music magazine Q, said it best. Young music fans just see him as this really strange guy who was involved in this court case. Michael Jackson needs to remind people that he was the man who wrote Don't Stop and performed Billie Jean. But how, after a decade of ridicule, do you remind people that you are the king of pop? Well, as the saying goes, death heals all wounds.
In breaking news, there are unconfirmed reports that Michael Jackson has died in a Los Angeles hospital.
Don't have any other independent confirmation as of yet, just the TMZ website reporting that Michael Jackson has died this evening.
That we do have now word, according to the Los Angeles Times is reporting that Michael Jackson has died.
I feel like a majority of Gen Z could tell you where they were the day that Michael Jackson died. I personally was like 3 years old when he died, so I was probably just like running around the house and pissing about. But my point being, Michael Jackson's death was like a cultural shockwave, and even calling it that is a complete understatement. I mean, despite everything, despite the allegations, despite the jokes, despite the tabloids, he was still an inspiration and an anchor in the music industry for at least 4 decades. And for some people, he was just one of those celebrities that have been famous your entire life, and you can't really imagine your life without them. You don't really imagine them dying, like Morgan Freeman. But his death reminded people that he was still human. And the 360 that the media did when it came to Michael Jackson would have given you whiplash. It went from controversy to grieving. Networks started playing his music non-stop, and his face was plastered everywhere. Regardless of if they thought he was innocent or not, the media knew even in death, Michael Jackson was still extremely profitable, and they weren't going to miss an opportunity to take advantage of that. And it also seemed like Michael Jackson's death really aided his public image because he was truly gone. There could be no more scandals, no more interviews, no more weird public moments for people to dissect. Michael Jackson was truly and permanently frozen in time. His disappearance from the public eye allowed the narrative to shift from crazy person to fallen icon. Not to mention, tuning into watching Michael Jackson's public funeral naturally tugged at people's heartstrings, and it allowed people to join in on the grieving process and feel as if they were grieving alongside the Jacksons themselves. When you saw all of his siblings together, you saw his young children faced with grief, and even your favorite celebrities publicly mourning him, it reminded you that there was still a family, there was still a people behind Michael Jackson who really loved him. And as human beings tend to do after a sudden tragic passing like this, they begin to look for someone to blame. I mean, there was his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, and the press, but after a decade of mockery, people began to look inwards, and they started to ask themselves, did we do this? Did we kill Michael Jackson? It was clear that a cultural conversation needed to be had, because in hindsight, all of the jokes and the tabloid harassment started to look cruel. And the release of This Is It, which was a sort of documentary slash concert film, showed audiences that before his passing, Michael was rehearsing tirelessly for his comeback tour, and he was still artistically really sharp. The documentary challenged the media's rhetoric that Michael Jackson had suddenly become completely dysfunctional, and it showed people and allowed them to see for themselves that the GOAT still had it. And this wasn't to say that people suddenly forgot about the allegations or that people had forgiven him, but it's a general rule of thumb not to speak ill of the dead, especially if the casket was buried so recently. And so grief overshadowed criticism in the headlines. Now the majority of Gen Z was actually witness to this historical event. In fact, many of us today recount online how we were affected firsthand by his passing, either witnessing our parents mourning him or feeling some kind of grief for him ourselves. However, Michael's public image never fully recovered from all the allegations, which leads me to public perception of him today. After his passing, his music and legacy regained enormous power because death gave him an untouchable status. But as time passed and the world got used to Michael Jackson's absence, the lingering question of, well, did he do it, was finally allowed back into mainstream conversation. But of course, it wasn't met without resistance, because many Michael Jackson fans would immediately just shut the conversation down, telling you to let him rest. He was found not guilty on all counts, and that was all they needed. They'll argue that continually dragging up old evidence against Michael Jackson, especially after his passing, is just exploiting him, which has been a very big problem for Michael Jackson fans in recent years, with the countless attempts at creating documentaries or deep dives into Michael Jackson's trial. The biggest example of this is the HBO documentary Leaving Neverland. Released in 2019, Leaving Neverland created a deep and lasting division among the general public about Michael Jackson. The testimonies of James Safechuck and Wayne Robson caused a lot of stress and shock as a result of the graphic details about alleged child sexual abuse, which led to a widespread re-evaluation of Michael's innocence. In reaction to this, Michael's estate released a statement ahead of the film's premiere, calling the project a pathetic attempt to exploit and cash in on Michael Jackson. Some members of the Jackson family even spoke out against the documentaries, including brothers Marlon, Tito, and Jackie.
Do you not believe him when he says that?
I do not believe him when he says that because we know our brother. Michael wouldn't do anything like that.
Michael's not here to defend himself.
So you think the only reason they're doing it is because Michael is no longer here?
Despite all this, Michael Jackson's legacy still remained intact, albeit very tainted in the eyes of the general public, until 2026 with the release of the Michael Jackson biopic. With Michael's nephew Jafar Jackson portraying him, the movie shifted public narrative from past controversies to celebrating his monumental talent. The movie humanizes Michael Jackson in a way that really hasn't been done before in the media by focusing on his childhood and his early years. Not only that, but audiences are also able to relate to Michael by witnessing his struggles with loneliness, insecurities, and toxic family dynamics. The release has sparked a massive resurgence in his music, with Billie Jean currently at #1 on the global Spotify charts with 5.6 million streams. His Dangerous album has also re-entered the Billboard 200, an album which was released 35 years ago. I mean, really think about that. Many people are also saying that Michael Mania, which describes the hysteria and fan worship surrounding Michael Jackson in the 80s and 90s, has made a comeback. With Michael's name constantly in the headlines and his music in the charts, it almost feels like he's alive again. Now, comparing all of this with the treatment of Michael in the 2000s, I mean, the difference is, how do you even explain it? Today it feels like there's almost no room for criticism when it comes to Michael Jackson anymore. In fact, as I'm making this video, there's currently a boycott against Netflix after they announced the release of a 3-part docu-series providing a forensic look into the 2005 child molestation criminal trial of Michael Jackson, many advocates of which are actually Gen Z. So now you've seen everything. You've seen the rise and the fall and the rise again of Michael Jackson. You've seen the way he was treated while he was alive. It's time to put Gen Z on trial. So Gen Z claims that they would treat Michael Jackson better than previous generations treated him while he was alive. They would have understood his artistry, they would have understood his struggles, and of course, they would have played Twister with him. But does this claim really hold any weight? How different, truly, is Gen Z from their predecessors? Well, let's start in Gen Z's defense. Celebrity culture is very different from how it was in the 2000s. At the time, celebrity breakdowns were considered entertainment. Paparazzi would hound them at the most vulnerable until they reached a breaking point and captured all of it on camera to sell to media outlets. Today, Gen Z will look back on this and call it unethical, because in our lifetime, we've witnessed countless stars break down in front of the public eye. Amanda Bynes and Britney Spears are prime examples of this. Today, they're mostly spoken about with sympathy, and we push to protect them. For instance, on the 4th of March 2026, Britney Spears was arrested for suspicion of driving under the influence. Camera footage of this was uploaded to TikTok by TMZ, which they received backlash for, commenters telling them to leave her alone and to stop making her a public spectacle. The same was uploaded to Facebook, where the older generation usually reside, and they garnered a very different reaction. There's a clear distaste for this form of entertainment within our generation because we've seen the consequences of this. We've seen the tears, we've seen the breakdowns, and in the worst case scenarios, we've seen the death of a celebrity. I think Michael Jackson would definitely have benefited from this new approach to celebrity culture. More than that, Gen Z also has a better understanding of mental health issues. I mean, it might be hard to imagine, but mental health awareness didn't really become a very popular thing until the 2010s. Before that, there was both a lack of information and a taboo around discussions of mental health amongst the general public. Witness witnessing Michael's behavior in the 2000s resulted in the words freakish or crazy being thrown around in the media. There was never a conversation about why Michael Jackson behaved a certain way, just that it wasn't normal and it was weird. But today, Gen Z would look at his behavior and interpret it as trauma or even neurodivergence. They recognize the intense abuse that Michael and his siblings had endured at the hands of their father during their childhood. But having been the generation that grew up on child stars with Disney and Nickelodeon, we have seen the consequences of abuse and fame on young children. Gen Z also tends to contextualize behavior more psychologically than previous generations have. And knowing that Michael Jackson has been enduring this kind of attention since the age of 5, fame-induced psychological damage and a lack of normal social development is a clear factor in his behavior. I mean, in 1995, Michael even released a song called Childhood, and the lyrics were obviously his way of explaining his behavior the best way that he could. Look back and see the song for what it was. A plea for others to be more understanding about Michael's behavior as a result of deep-rooted childhood trauma. There's also a difference between generations and how they view physical violence towards children. Gen Z has a particular dislike for Joe Jackson considering the abuse he inflicted on his kids for the sake of success and money. Again, Gen Z has witnessed child exploitation firsthand with stars like Jeanette McCurdy. And so Michael's childhood would naturally receive more sympathy from a generation who speaks out against abuse rather than an older generation who views that as simply discipline, and they don't particularly see a problem with Joe Jackson's parenting.
Others have said, oh, he was just old school. Which was he to you?
I think it's old school. And that may extrapolate into being a little abusive. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Another big factor in Gen Z's defense is social media. Before the 2010s, the narrative was usually controlled by the tabloids, which allowed rumors and lies to spread without any pushback. But we're talking about a generation who grew up with the internet and had constant access to information at their fingertips at all times. All misinformation about Michael Jackson could be easily disproven today, such as his issues with vitiligo. Not only does Gen Z already advocate against body shaming, but vitiligo awareness is much more higher now. And rumors such as Michael Jackson was bleaching his skin or that he wanted to be white wouldn't be as prominent today. Social media is also really important because it would give Michael Jackson a platform to defend himself and to explain himself. Think about how many apology videos you see on your For You page. I mean, celebrities and influencers are able to just pick up their phone and speak directly to their audiences in real time when a controversy is happening. But back then, if a documentary portrayed you negatively, millions of people would see that version first, and there was fuck all you could do about it. I mean, you'd have to sit there with this big VHS camera in your face and you'd have to explain yourself and have the tape like copied and sent out to the guy. It would take forever. I mean, today celebrities and influencers just pick up their phone, go on live and explain themselves. And like, could you imagine Michael Jackson on like Instagram live? Like, come on guys, none of it's true. So far, in favor of Gen Z has a very strong argument. They have low tolerance for tabloid culture, body shaming, and a lot of difficulties that Michael Jackson had to endure during his life. Times have definitely changed, and we've heard in support of Gen Z, but what about against? Well, as progressive as Generation Z wants to come across, I'm sure we can all agree that a majority of Gen Z is quite performative. We argue against body shaming or abuse until it comes in a funny package. Case in point, meme culture. Now, if you're actively getting Michael Jackson content on your For You page, how many pictures of Joe Jackson have you seen in the comment section? Maybe a gif from the movie of him looking really shocked, or maybe a photo of him holding a belt with a funny caption like, "We'll call it the reincarnation tour." Why is it that when we see Michael Jackson's trauma performed on screen, we feel bad for him and we condemn Joe Jackson, but when it becomes a meme, all of a sudden we're able to laugh? I mean, we watched the same movie, didn't we? Now, if Michael Jackson were alive today, how do you think he would feel seeing that? Imagine him coming across a young child dancing or singing to a Michael Jackson song, and the comments are filled with a photo of his abusive dad holding a belt, saying something like, "Keep your eyes on me," or "Stop moving your feet." And let's talk about body shaming for a minute. I noticed that during the biopic premiere, where a majority of the Jackson family came together to support Jafar, Michael's siblings were getting a lot of comments about their appearances. People were saying that LaToya used to be so pretty and that she looks an unhealthy weight now, likening her to cartoon characters. Comments about Jermaine Jackson were also being made, such as, "His hair looks bad," or "He needs plastic surgery." I mean, let's face it, even in our progressive society, appearance is still important and a point of critique. If Gen Z is picking apart the appearance of his siblings, then what makes us think they'll be any kinder to Michael himself today? And this isn't confined to the Jackson family either. Other celebrities such as Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, and Madonna are also constantly picked apart for their appearances. Ariana and Cynthia underwent a lot of fire for being too skinny and had people theorizing that there was some sort of competitive eating disorder between them on the set of Wicked. Madonna is also often criticized for her facial surgeries and use of Botox, people claiming that she doesn't look like herself or that she suffers from pillow face. Gen Z specifically seems to have a habit of mocking older celebrities' appearances and also has a fear of aging themselves, but that's a video topic for another day. As I said before, Michael Jackson's appearance towards the end of his life was vastly different from what his prime was considered to be. Towards the end of his life, his skin was pale, his facial structure was completely different, and many people likened him to a monster. And this leads me to another point, Gen Z's Michael Jackson phobia. This was a trend way before the release of the biopic, where there was a consensus among Gen Z that it was funny to say that you had a fear of Michael Jackson, or some people did genuinely have a fear of Michael Jackson, usually because of his appearance, calling him uncanny valley or that he was just really creepy to look at. But I don't think it's a very popular opinion anymore now that liking him is trendy. I believe that this fear is actually genuine and a consequence of how Michael Jackson's appearance was constantly a joke during the late 2000s and even into the early 2010s. He was already being portrayed as creepy by the media, but his facial features and skin being overly pale in photos made him appear ghastly to some people. This would turn into a punchline in the early internet era, when Michael's appearance was photoshopped and edited to look scary and made to freak others out. I feel like a lot of Gen Z have had a similar experience where they see something really creepy about Michael Jackson online, like a video or an edit that has stuck with them permanently and kind of scarred them. I feel like this era of creepy Michael Jackson edits would have traumatized a lot of young Gen Zs who had unfiltered internet access. I mean, this could be like another video topic by itself, like the era of creepy Michael Jackson edits and like where it came from and compiling a list, and I don't know, if you guys want to see that, let me know. Anyway, my point being that making fun of Michael Jackson's appearance, especially as he got older and looked very different from what is considered to be his prime, it would be very prominent today if he was still alive. And I think one of the biggest points against Gen Z is cancel culture. Now, imagine if the allegations were to come out today, Gen Z would be absolutely ruthless to Michael Jackson compared to any other generation. I feel that we as a generation understandably don't take allegations regarding minors very lightly, and we don't typically believe in innocent until we're proven guilty anymore, especially at a time where predators like Dan Schneider, P. Diddy, Jeffrey Epstein have gotten away with decades of abuse. Not to mention this being the generation who witnessed countless influencers, YouTubers being exposed for talking to minors and having inappropriate relationship with minors. All this being said, I feel like Gen Z is undoubtedly more sensitive to grooming allegations. Sleeping in bed with children and having private friendships with children as an adult wouldn't land any better with Gen Z than it did with previous generations. In fact, it would land a lot worse. I mean, really think about it. If Michael Jackson came out and said what he said today, there would be endless think pieces, online discourse, video essays, and fake AI images or videos. And as I said before, at best, Gen Z can be considered morally performative. Now, if the popular opinion was that Michael Jackson was a predator and he was guilty, people would immediately start denouncing him, especially if they were rewarded socially or by the algorithm. Suddenly, Michael's difficult childhood or social stunting wouldn't matter as much to people. And the final argument against Gen Z is as unfortunate as it is true. Celebrities can only receive mass praise or sympathy after immense suffering or even death. They can spend their entire lives bleeding out in front of a camera, but it's only after the light leaves their eyes that people begin mourning and asking why they didn't do something sooner. This flaw, of course, isn't just confined to Gen Z, but society and humanity as a whole. Amy Winehouse was bombarded and criticized throughout her life, reduced to an addict, and only became a tragic icon after she died. Britney Spears was mocked for being crazy and over-sexualized until awareness about her conservatorship and struggles became public. Now she's revered as a timeless pop icon. Michael Jackson was mocked for being socially bizarre, taunted by being called wacko, and was a constant punchline until he passed away. Then ridicule was replaced with nostalgia. It's a vicious cycle seen with countless celebrities throughout history, and perhaps that's just the cost of being famous. In the end, maybe Gen Z would have been more compassionate towards Michael Jackson. Maybe we would have understood the trauma behind his behavior, and maybe we would have defended him. But whether people are ready to admit it or not, spectacle is still a very big part of our culture as a society, especially online. We turn people into memes, we publicly dissect breakdowns, and as human beings we tend to only appreciate a good thing after it's gone. So all this being said, would Gen Z treat Michael Jackson better? I'll leave the final answer up to you. I want to hear your opinions in the comments below. Thanks for watching.